Hi everyone, you're welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Nancy, and if this is your first time coming across my channel, kindly subscribe, share, and like my tutorials. So, in today's class, I'm going to be showing you guys how to sew a simple pencil dress. In our previous tutorial, I showed you guys how to draft a simple pencil dress. So, if you're interested in learning I drafted this dress, I'll be dropping the link in the description box. So these are the patterns we drafted in our previous video. I have 2.5 yards of fabric here, but if you're on a bigger side and you want a longer sleeve, then you can use 3 yards. Now we are going to transfer these patterns onto our fabric. So I'm done cutting out all the lining pieces. The first thing I'm going to do is to unpin the pattern for the front. And once I've done this, I'll go ahead to spread out the actual fabric, making sure that the right side of the actual fabric is facing me, like this. Now I'm going to go ahead to place the lining directly on the actual fabric. You know already that the lining doesn't have a front and back. So just make sure you're placing the lining on the right side of the actual fabric. Once you are done with this, the next thing you're going to do is to pin the neckline of both the lining and the actual fabric together. And after pinning, you would head over to the sewing machine to stitch the neckline following the direction of my finger. So when you get to the center of the neckline here, you're going to raise the machine footer up before stitching this other side. So this is actually very easy to do. Now at the end of the dress, you'd notice that the lining is shorter than the actual fabric, so this is normal. Now for the back pieces, I'm going to take out the back pattern and then I'll go ahead to spread out the actual fabric. You know that the back pieces is into two because of the center back, which has a zipper allowance opening. So this is the right side of my fabric and I'm going to place the lining directly on it this way. So once I'm done with this, I'm going to go ahead to pin the neckline of both the lining and the actual fabric together, just like you see me doing. Now I'm going to head over to the sewing machine to stitch the neckline by 1/2 inch, and this is how the bottom should be. Now for the other part of the back piece, I'm going to place the right side of the fabric to face me, and then I'll place the lining directly on it. Once you're done with this, you go ahead to pin the neckline of both the lining and the actual fabric together, just like you see me doing. And after pinning, you'd head over to the sewing machine to stitch the neckline by 1/2 inch. So the next thing we're going to do now is to join the lining to the actual fabric at the end. So now I'm going to align the lining to the end of the actual fabric. So make sure to align them so that they can be on the same length. So once you have done that, you are going to go ahead to pin the hem together. So once you are done pinning, you are going to head over to the sewing machine to stitch the ends together by 1/2 inch. So for this side of the back, we are going to align the end of the lining to meet the end of the actual fabric, and then we'll go ahead to pin the ends together. After pinning, you would head over to the sewing machine to stitch by 1/2 inch. So now for the second part of the back piece, we are also going to align the end of the lining to meet the end of the actual fabric, and then we'll go ahead to pin the ends together. After pinning, you head over to the sewing machine to stitch the ends by 1/2 inch. So I'm done stitching it down now, and this is what it looks like. So now if you come to the armhole area, you would notice that the lining is shorter here. What you have to do is to align the lining to the actual fabric on the armhole area here. Once you've aligned it together, you go ahead to pin the sides. So now you're going to continue pinning the edges all the way down until you get to the end. And when you get to the end here, you'd notice that the actual fabric is pushing up a little bit. So this is absolutely normal because we reduced the lining by 1/2 inch. Now on this side, you're also going to align the lining to the actual fabric around the armhole area. And once you've done that, you keep pinning till you get to the end of the fabric. Now I'll head over to the sewing machine to stitch the edges of the front piece by 1/2 inch following the direction of my finger. So for the back pieces, we are also going to be doing exactly the same thing. Now on the armhole area, I'm going to align the lining to meet the actual fabric, and then I'll go ahead to pin the edges all the way down to the end. Now when you get to the end, you would also notice that the actual fabric is pushed upward as well. Now you go ahead to hold this together with the pin. On this other side as well, I'm just going to pin the sides. So make sure you're doing exactly the same thing you see me doing. And when you get to the end, you would also notice that the actual fabric is pushing up a little. Now, once you are done with this, you head over to the sewing machine to stitch the sides by half of an inch, and you stitch this other side by half of an inch. Now, for the other side of the back piece, we are going to be doing exactly the same thing. We are going to align the armhole, and then you pin it together. You go ahead to pin the edges all the way down to the end, and when you get to the end, you notice that the actual fabric is pushing up a little. And then once you are done with that, you go ahead to pin the other side. So just make sure you are pinning all the way down, and when you get to the end, you would also notice that the actual fabric has pushed up a little. Now I'll head over to my sewing machine to stitch the edges. So I've gone ahead to stitch the sides together. The next thing you're going to do is to notch the seam allowances around the sides. So this notching I'm doing right now is very important, especially if you are curvy, so that the edges of your fabric would be well relaxed. Now from the armhole, I went ahead to turn the fabric to the right side. So this is how the front piece of your dress should be after it has been turned to the right side. This is the back piece. I'm also going to notch the sides of the seam, and then from the armhole, I'm going to turn the back piece to the right side of the fabric, and I'll do the same for the second back piece. So guys, I've turned the back pieces to the right side, and this is how it looks like now. So the next step is to iron all the pieces. So I've ironed all the pieces, and this is for the front piece. You can see it's looking neat, and these are the two back pieces. They're also looking neat as well. So now we are going to be marking the darts for the front piece. To do this, you are going to fold your front piece into two equally, and then you would bring the pattern of the front piece forward. Now you are going to place the center of the pattern paper directly on the center of the fabric this way, like I've done here. And remember that when we were adding stitching allowances to the actual fabric, I added half of an inch stitching allowance to the shoulder here. So I'm going to mark half of an inch at the top of the shoulder here. So now I'm going to replace this that I have on the pattern paper on my actual fabric. It's very easy to do. If you have been watching my tutorials, you should know how to go about this. So I've done this for the front piece of the dress, and for the back pieces, I'm also going to be replacing the dots I have on the pattern paper directly on the fabric. Next thing I'm going to do is to pick the dots this way to fold the fabric into two, and then I would go ahead to pin the fold together. Now on the waistline, I'm going to come in by half of an inch, just like I did for the other back piece, and then I would connect these 3 points together. And once I'm done with this, I would head over to my sewing machine to stitch directly on the white line. And after stitching the darts for the both pieces, this is how it should be. So you can see how it came out really beautiful and nice. So make sure you are doing exactly the same thing. So now the next thing we are going to do is to join the shoulders of both the front piece and the back piece together. To do this, you are going to place the right side of the back pieces on the right side of the front piece, like I've done here. Now on this side of the shoulder, you're going to pick the actual fabric and place it on each other, and to also pick the lining to place it on each other as well, making sure that the joining at the shoulder aligns with the shoulder on the front and with the shoulder at the back. And then the first pin you'll be placing would be at the center here, after which you go ahead to pin the rest of the actual fabric and to also pin the rest of the lining on each other. And once you are done pinning the shoulders together, you would head over to the sewing machine to stitch the shoulders by half of an inch with a straight stitch. And once you are done with that, you're also going to be stitching the shoulders on this side together, actual fabric facing each other with the lining facing each other as well, but making sure that the joining at the shoulder aligns together. And then I'll go ahead to pin the center of the shoulders so that it doesn't move or shift while stitching. So once you're done pinning, go ahead to pin the rest of the actual fabric together and the rest of the lining together. And once you're done, you would head over to the sewing machine to stitch the shoulders together by half of an inch as well. So I've gone ahead to stitch the shoulders together. You can see how neat it is on the inside. So this is actually one of the easiest way to stitch your shoulders together. So guys, I'm done joining the shoulders together. Now we are going to go ahead to join the back pieces together. I'm going to place the back pieces right side of each pieces facing each other. So now I'm going to place the front piece into two side by side equally. And now from the shoulder joining here at the top, I'm going to place the front piece directly on the back piece this way. Now I'm going to be placing this side by side. Take note of that. The side of the front piece would be placed on the side of the back piece. So make sure you're placing this side by side. So the purpose of doing this is to make sure that by the time we are done stitching, all the sides would be aligned. So when you align the sides together, you would be able to mark where your slit and zipper would be at the center back. So now to mark where my zipper is going to stop, I would place my tape from the shoulder here all the way down to my hip line. My hip line is 25 inches, right? So from the hip line here, I'm going to come up by 3 inches. So make sure that from your hip line, you're marking 3 inches. And the reason is because your zipper is not supposed to be below your hip line, so that when you sit, you won't be sitting directly on your zipper. Now, I'm going to extend this point towards the zipper allowance here. So this point here is where my zipper would stop. So what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to place my chalk from this point I marked to draw a straight line following the center of the front piece. So I'm basically using the center fold of the front piece as a guide to draw this straight line on the zipper allowance. Now for the slit, which would be at the end of the center back, I'm going to place my tip from the end of the dress to mark 6 inches because that is how long I want my slit to be. So once you are done marking your slit length, you go ahead to extend this line we marked initially to meet this new point. Now I'm going to take out the front piece for you guys to see what I did here. So now to cover up the slit, I'm going to extend this point I marked here into the zipper allowance like this. Now from this point, we are going to make a straight stitch all the way down. And when you get to this point, you raise the machine footer up to stitch inside the zipper allowance like this. So this is what I had after I was done stitching it straight down and into the zipper allowance. So this is another way of going about your slit. This slit is not fully opened. This one is the one that covers. So you can see how the slit is looking like in front, and this is because we stitched it into the zipper allowance. So later on, we're going to work on the slit area. So now I'm going to go ahead to place my zipper. So guys, I've stitched my zipper and I've also secured the top of the zipper as well. You can see how neat the zipper is. So now I'm going to be attaching my sleeves to my dress. So I'm going to fold the sleeve into two this way to notch the center of the sleeve at the top here. So make sure you are doing this so you can identify where the center of your sleeve is. So on this shoulder area where we had our joining, I'm going to be placing the center of my sleeve directly on it to pin it together. So I'll start pinning from this center here and then I'll go ahead to pin to the both sides. So I have a tutorial on my channel on how I drafted a short sleeve. I'll be dropping the link in the description box. So I'm going to head over to the sewing machine to stitch by 1/2 inch. Now I'm going to be doing the same thing for the other sleeve as well. I'm going to place the center of the sleeve directly on the joining I have on the shoulder area to pin the center together, and then I'll go ahead to pin the rest of the sides together as well. After pinning, I'm going to head over to the sewing machine to stitch it down by 1/2 inch. So after I was done stitching down the sleeve, this is what it looks like. You can go ahead to serge the seam around the armhole area. So serge means weaving. So at this moment, if you don't have a weaving machine available, you can actually do that later after you've completed your dress. So now I'm going to be turning everything to the wrong side because the next thing for us to do is to join the sides of both the front piece and the back piece together. So make sure you're placing the right side of the front piece directly on the right side of the back piece. Once you've arranged this properly, you go ahead to pin the sides of the front and back piece together. Now I'm just going to pin from the sleeve all the way down to the end of the dress, and I'll do the same for the other side as well. So once you're done pinning the sides, this is how it should look like. Now we are going to be adding our body measurements. So at the end of the sleeve, I'm going to place my round sleeve measurements divided by 2, and I'm going to mark it here. Now on this second side of the sleeve, I'm also going to place my round sleeve measurement divided by 2. I marked it here. Now on the bust area, I'm going to place my bust measurements divided by 2. So I placed my bust measurements, and the remaining allowance that was left, I divided it into 2 to split it on both sides. So I placed half of it here and the remaining half on this other side. Now I went ahead to connect this point to the point I marked on my sleeve. Now on the waistline, I would place my waist measurements divided by 2. The remaining allowance that was left, I splitted it into 2 and then placed half of it here and the other half on this other side. Now I'll connect the waist measurement to meet the bust measurement, just like you see me doing. Now from my shoulder here, I'm going to measure all the way down to my hip line. My hip line is 25 inches, so I marked it here. So now on the hip line, I'm going to place my hip measurements divided by 2. And the remaining allowance that was left, I divided it into 2 to split it on both sides. So if you don't really understand what I'm doing right now, you can actually refer to the blouse tutorial or the skirt tutorial on how I joined the sides. Now I'm going to connect my waist measurement to meet my hip measurement this way. Once you are done with this, you are going to measure the remaining allowance at the side of the hip. So this is 1.5 inch. Now I'm going to mark 1.5 inch on the hem here, and I would also mark it on this side as well to connect my hip measurement to meet this point I marked around the hem area. So this is basically how to go about marking your body measurement. Now I'll head over to the sewing machine to stitch directly on these white lines. So after securing the sides of the dress, the last thing we'll be working on is the slit area. So for the slits on this folded part here, you can decide to use a hemming gum or use your needle and thread to stitch the fold. So now I'm going to be placing the hemming gum inside this fold. And after placing the hemming gum properly, I'll go ahead to use my iron to iron this folded part. And once you're done ironing, you would notice that this folded part is now glued to the lining. Alright guys, so this is basically all for making a simple dress. Now I'm going to turn the dress to the right side of the fabric, and this is the final outcome. It came out really beautiful.